You're listening to 106.9 Tune FM, and today we are going to be doing a deep dive into some of the biggest news hitting the music industry lately, and that is Taylor Swift and the return of ownership for her master albums, master recordings. So today we have Dr. Wellet Potter back in the studio again, joining us, and Wellet, I would say, is you are one of the first people I think of at UNE when I think of Taylor Swift. You've done a lot of work in regards to copyright, the law, and you even attended the first ever Swiftposium, which was held last year, which I think is really, really cool. So can you, our listeners know you, I know you quite well by now, but in terms of your interest in Taylor Swift, whether that be academic or personal, why don't we start there?
Well, thanks very much for having me, Ash. And yeah, Taylor Swift. So I think what I'll do to talk about how this all began, of course, like everybody else on the planet, I had heard of Taylor Swift way before I started researching her. And I actually remember her album called Red, which I think was her third studio album. I, listened to it. It got me through a difficult time in my life. And she'd always been on the peripheral, but I wouldn't call myself at the time a Swiftie, one of her fans. I enjoyed her music. Every so often I'd hear a new song of hers. I'd enjoy it. But what happened was that it was about October of the year before last, there was an announcement that here in Australia in February of last year in Melbourne, there was going to be the world's first academic conference on Taylor Swift. And there was a call for abstracts. And when I received it, I was like, oh, wow, this would be really fascinating to do a deep dive into Taylor Swift. And of course, my area of passion is copyright law and intellectual property. And so my mind immediately went to, I knew that there had been, basically issues to do with why she'd had to and decided to re-record her first 6 albums. So I thought, oh, I'd love to do a deep dive into that. So I pitched an abstract and it was accepted. And the actual Swiftposium itself gained a lot of interest. There were over 400 submissions from academics from all around the world, from, I think they said 75 different countries. And they picked about 130 people to present there. And so I was one of them. So I was so excited, went to Melbourne, had a great time. It was so beautifully organised. It was actually run at the same time or the same week that Taylor was going to be performing in Melbourne. So it was great timing. And in fact, she had agreed to attend the Swiftposium for the first day, I believe. But what happened, of all things, her boyfriend Travis got into the Super Bowl.
Oh,
That was on the same day. So of course, she had the Super Bowl trumped the conference. But yes, we were told, keep it under wraps. But yes, she's coming. Originally, like the organisers told us that. So we had a wonderful
bummer
time.
though that didn't happen.
I know. And but look, the conference was amazing. There was it was very different to any other academic conference that I'd ever been to. Firstly, the mix of the actual topics. Okay, the commonality was Taylor Swift, but so diverse, so diverse. So, for example, I remember a session where some people in medicine were had done research on her music in response to giving CPR. So there was something that, through to Swiftnomics, as it was called, the economics behind her tours. So it was just incredible, the diversity of what I saw at the Swiftposium, and of course was very fortunate, had the opportunity to present. And my topic, of course, focused on the copyright reasons, the intellectual property and contractual reasons why she decided to go ahead and re-record her first 6 albums. So I did that. And then I also did a little bit of media after that on it, and I was invited then to go to Bond University up on the Gold Coast and give a Twilight seminar about this. So I had a wonderful time. Went to Bond, did that, and then the Bond Radio also did a feature. So and then towards the end of last year, I wrote an academic journal article. I think it was about 13,000 words. And it was published in the Media and Arts Law Review. It was peer reviewed and went through that. And it's kind of, really delves into the nitty gritty, the different legal aspects, the sections of the law under the US Copyright Act, and all the other things to do with the legal implications of this. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I was very excited for Taylor on the weekend when I heard that she has announced, that she owns all the music that she's ever made. And apparently the deal is worth about $360 million US, and she purchased it from a group called Shamrock Capital, a private equity firm who had owned her music prior to that. But it's a very long story about why she didn't own her music to begin with. She's never, in fact, owned the art that she made, all of the music, album covers, it just goes on, all the photographs, etc., for any of the material from the first 6 albums, and also unreleased material. It all comes into it. It was never owned by her up until now.
And so I know that, music industry law is probably not explicitly your speciality, but is that common from your research? Common for these record labels and big, I guess, publishers of music and things like that, for them to own all the rights of these recordings and these pieces of art rather than the artists themselves? That's common.
It is. It's very common. So what happens and it certainly happened to Taylor Swift, often, you've got a young artist who's showing great promise, who loves music, and what happens is that they sign to a label, and we always hear, it's always about signing to the label. It's like, woohoo, ka-ching, ka-ching. But it's not really like that in real life. What happens, the young artist signs to the label, but what they are signing are the rights to any of the work that they produce. And so what it means is that the label owns it, controls it, and makes the most money out of it. And what also happens often, a young artist, they have no money, of course, when they're getting started. So they need to get what's called an advance. So they're given money up front to be able to produce their work. And also, of course, money for living and all that. That's in advance. And they have to pay that back before they can even start to get any sort of royalties. And of course, the cut for royalties is often very low. So it's really difficult for young artists. They're doing a lot of work, even if they manage to be highly successful, like Taylor Swift, but they actually don't own their work, and it's very common. And so what when we actually look at the works themselves in and under copyright, so you've got a song, right? And the song might have an album cover. There's the actual underlying written musical score and lyrics. There's the actual sound recording, which is known as the master. And very much in the music industry, there's a big focus on the master because, it's basically worth the most money. But and we hear this term, the masters, and it's thrown around a lot, but it encompasses often so much more. It's all the other stuff that goes with the song. And each of these, each song basically involves multiple copyrighted works. So we've got the actual underlying song, which is the musical work. There's the lyrics, which is a literary work. There's the master recording, which is a sound recording and copyright. If you have a music video, it's a film. And any album cover is artwork. So, just for one song, there's actually all these different elements that are considered separate works for the sake of copyright. And of course, when we look at a record label contract, they are after the rights to each of those. So in Taylor Swift's situation, because she's a composer and a songwriter, she actually from age 14 signed to Sony ATV Music Publishing, and she was their youngest signee at age 14. So she had basically a contract with them, and that pertained to the actual underlying music that she writes. So basically, they, license that music to others, and she gets a cut of that. And they were the people she was dealing with, and that relationship with them, with Sony ATV, continued for 16 years. With her record label contract, she signed to the group called Big Machine, who was run by Scott Porgetta, and she did that at age 15. And the media tends to just focus on Big Machine. But what's interesting is Big Machine was for like the record label, which encompassed the master and the sound recording and those associated things. But she always had this relationship with her music publishing company, which was Sony ATV. So it's something that a lot of people don't understand. There's got to be like this separation between record label on one side and music publishing for the musical composition on the other. And so with her relationship with Big Machine, of course, being a 15-year-old, her parents probably signed her contract for her because she was a legal minor. But it would have been fairly typical, the terms of that, basically giving Big Machine the ownership, the control of the things that she produced in exchange for giving her an advance to create, promoting her, the money for the tours the worldwide tours that she subsequently went on. So all of that, the rights to everything that she created with Big Machine basically were with Big Machine. So that was how she started out. And then she was with Big Machine for 13 years in the end, so quite a long time, really, when you think about it. And her fame grew. She went and she released subsequent 6 albums in the end, went on multiple worldwide tours. In 2018, there was, talk. What was she going to do? Was she going to re-sign with Big Machine? Keep in mind that for that whole time, she was not the owner. She did not own any of the works that she produced with them. And she'd made it very clear, and as her success had grown, that that really tore her up, emotionally, not being the owner, not being able to control what happened to it or where it was licensed. And I think that's really interesting. And when I started to delve into that, it was like, well, in copyright law, we have this concept of what's called moral rights here in Australia, and they're personal rights that vest with an author or a composer. They don't actually have moral rights for songwriters in the US, which is interesting. But I actually, in the article that I wrote, I analysed if Taylor Swift had been Australian and it had been written, would moral rights actually help her in any way? And there are 3 different moral rights. One is the right to attribution, meaning that you're credited as the author. One is against false attribution, so that you're not falsely credited as an author. And one is integrity. And integrity was the right that stood out to me. I thought, she's kind of with what she's saying about how upsetting it was to her not to have control of her music and ownership. It's kind of like, well, could the moral right of integrity aid Taylor Swift if it fell under Australian law? I looked into it, but my ultimate conclusion was probably not, because the moral right of integrity requires basically some sort of derogatory treatment of a work, and we can't really say that her works were subject to derogatory treatment by any of the owners that have gone on to possess it. So that was my ultimate conclusion there. But so in 2018, she was given the option by Big Machine to basically earn back, well, I say earn back, to earn ownership of each of her first 6 albums. And the way they were offering it was that she would have to produce a brand new album for every old album that they would sign over to her. And she didn't want to do that. It didn't sound like a good deal to her. So she basically said no. And she moved on to Republic Records, which is the Universal Music Group, as her new label. And the thing about Republic is that they allow her to own everything that she creates. And well, how does that work then, you might say? Because they're still obviously funding her activities. And the way it works is, and she has been very vocal that this should be the arrangement right throughout the music industry, it's that she retains the ownership and she licenses the works to them. And the only argument is about the length of time, the duration of that license. And so, in her opinion, that is the way that every single contract in the music industry should work, but very few of them do. And she's been very vocal about this. And there was a very famous speech that she gave, I think it was during 2019. She was getting the Woman of the Decade award, and she gave this really passionate speech about how difficult it has been for her to see her music, go on and be owned and possessed by others. And there's very much been a movement in the industry where these, private equity firms are buying up musicians' catalogs. And why private equity, you might say? The reason for that has been that music catalogs are really lucrative. They're growing in value all the time. Yes, the industry itself is changing in terms of the nature of revenue streams. So, streamings come in and that. But they're still year in, year out making money. And so private equity firms have jumped on the bandwagon. They've basically been buying up lots of different famous artists' catalogs because, the returns on them are so lucrative. So what happened was in 2018, when Swift changed to the Universal Music Group, and she wasn't given the opportunity at all after moving to Universal to buy her work. It was offered to a holding company called Ithaca, who was owned by a person called Scooter Braun, who she alleged had bullied her relentlessly throughout her previous career there. And so she was devastated by the sale, and Ithaca acquired the catalogue from Big Machine for an estimated $300 million US, but approximately 126 million of that was Taylor's catalogue, because there were other people's catalogues involved as well. And when the actual deal was announced, Taylor made a Tumblr post. It's a very famous one from 2019 where she said how devastated she was. She said that she was made aware of the deal at the same time as the rest of the world. She hadn't been given prior notice. And she talked about the bullying that she'd experienced by Scooter Braun and his associates. So, that was a very low point for her. And also what happened in 2018, she decided to move her music publishing rights over to the Universal Music Publishing Group as well. So basically, from 2018 onwards, she has been with the Universal Music Group as her record label and also as her music publishers. So you can kind of see why she'd do that, because she'd been with Sony ATV for 16 years for music publishing, but when she signed obviously what was a much more lucrative deal with the Universal Music Group, she's moved everything over, so it's all together. But there was always this sticky wicket for her, which was that she didn't own the rights to her masters from the first 6 albums. So that had gone on. So the Ithaca Holdings had her music in from 2019 onwards, managed by Scooter Braun. Her old label, Scott Pogetta with Big Machine, actually still had a stake in it. I guess the way these things work in contracts, they all want a cut of the pie. So it was a joint thing between Scott Pogetta and Scooter Braun. As a result of her Tumblr posting in 2019, which expressed how devastated she was, it kind of mobilized her fans, and the fans were outraged, the Swifties, and there were actual death threats made against Scooter Braun and his family. Like, it got kind of messy there. And it showed in that regard the power of, mobilizing fans through social media. She'd ask fans to let them know what they thought, but I think she was thinking more in like a business sense, like write a letter, not thinking there'd be like death threats against their families and them. So that was an interesting aspect, I thought, as well. So that was 2019, the acquisition by Ithaca Holdings. About 17 months later, in 2020, Ithaca Holdings sold her catalogue onto a group called Shamrock Capital. And the estimated price of that was between 300 million and 450 million. It's never been disclosed. We don't know. But it's so much money. And you think, obviously Scooter Braun had a big payday when that happened. And again, Taylor alleged that she wasn't given the opportunity to buy back her masters, although there had been some negotiations. When I investigated this and looked into it, there had been some negotiations between at least one of her representatives, and they'd had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. What fascinated me, these non-disclosure agreements seem to be used quite a lot throughout the industry, before certainly negotiations or to silence, allegations of bullying or whatever. And one of the conditions for this process of her potentially buying back her masters was that she was going to have to sign a non-disclosure agreement not to discuss the alleged bullying by Scooter Braun. And she said, no way, I'm not doing that, and she talked on social media, so she walked away. It was just not feasible for her, and she was not willing to do that. So again, it was fascinating to me to see how non-disclosure agreements can be used in these situations. Yeah.
It feels very, just the whole, like, obviously I'm not a lawyer. I'm not someone who has studied law. I kind of understand the things that I can do that are legal and the things that I can't do that are illegal. But this whole thing, even though it's all very legal in the United States, and I feel like we have to make the distinction between United States law and Australian law. We do have Australian record labels, but I'm not sure if they function in a similar way. It just seems very predatory. Holding the artist's music hostage is very much how it seems to me. And I guess I look at it wondering if this was any artist other than Taylor Swift, who is the biggest pop star of our generation. If it was anyone else, one, would we be hearing about it? And two, would this person even be getting their rights back? Because she had to jump through so many hoops just to own these things that she created.
That's right.
And I guess there's, some technicalities there of, did she technically create the music video or the album artwork? Like, should she own those? But her lyrics and her music that she wrote. And one of the ways that she got around that, and this is one of the few things that I do actually know, is re-recording those albums and creating Taylor's version in order to regain ownership in that kind of loophole. But, you spoke earlier, well, you mentioned that, so there was the masters and then, the original recordings, the lyrics, I guess the sheet music and the notation, so on and so forth. Each of those are their own separate intellectual property.
They considered it a work, and each of the works have their own bundle of rights in IP. Yeah, absolutely.
So then, is it just the master recordings? How I guess what I'm trying to work up to, and wording it absolutely spectacularly horribly, is how does that work in terms of copyright for her to re-record those albums that someone else owns?
Yeah, great.
If I'm understanding correctly.
Great question, Ash. So you're absolutely right. So all of those different works were owned by originally Big Machine and then Ithaca and then Shamrock. When she got to that point of, negotiations falling through in 2020, she decided then her option was to go and re-record the songs from the first 6 albums. And what you'll note, Ash, it's an interesting one. The Taylor's version album covers are they're similar, but they're different to the first album covers. And the reason for that is she couldn't infringe upon the copyright of the first album covers, but she could allude to it in different ways. So the reason she could re-record her music, she happened to hold the rights to the sheet music, which might have made things a little bit easier. But really, under the US law, anybody can make a new sound recording. I think it's section 114B, which is to do with basically like a cover version. You can make a new sound recording, even if it imitates the original, provided that it's independently fixed and it doesn't make a sample of the old master. And so that particular provision of the US Copyright Act enabled her to re-record each of her songs, and it's considered like a fresh new version of it, and she labeled it Taylor's version for branding and copyright purposes. So they're considered separate works for the purpose of copyright. They're owned by her and under her new label, the Republic Records with Universal, and all the associated rights with those new songs and new albums vest with her. So that was why it was an unusual move. It's a move that's not done very much, but the reason for it is, of course, cost mainly. Ash, a lot of artists don't have the sort of backing that she had. She had the backing then of Universal Music. They were willing to invest the money. She was able to rehire the people that worked with her originally. She had a desire in a way to do an even better version. And of course, you think about her voice as well, it would have developed from when she was 15. So she had up to the 6 albums to record. Now, what we found out on the weekend was that she had released 4 of the 6 albums, but we found out on the weekend she's actually recorded the 5th album and up to a quarter of the 6th. And she's basically said she's very happy. The 5th album's it was her original very first album, self-titled Taylor Swift. So she's re-recorded that, and you can imagine her voice has changed obviously in that time. They've got better technology, all of that. So I'm expecting the Taylor Swift album to be mind-blowing for fans. But what she said, the reason she'd only recorded up to a quarter of the final one, which is called Reputation, is that she recorded Reputation, I think it was in about 2019, and she said every time she's gone to do a re-record of it, she's found that basically she doesn't think she can better what she's already produced. So she's kind of she hasn't got to the point where she's gone and done it, and she was basically throwing it out there to the fans on the weekend saying, let me know, are you interested in a full Reputation album, a Taylor's version, or it'll be interesting to see whether she doesn't do it. Because of course now we have to consider that she's the owner of everything. Producing a Taylor's version is going to directly compete to some extent financially with the original version. And this is what we found when she released the first 4 Taylor's versions. It dramatically diluted the value of the original albums. So she's actually going to have to think about that now because she owns everything. So, but I dare say, okay, the value of the original albums has been diluted during these years while she hasn't owned them and while she's been producing, Taylor's version. But the fans are likely to rally, the Swifties are likely to rally, and they're likely to purchase both. And so I think that ultimately it's a wonderful thing for her. I'm so happy for her, thinking of her position as an artist, not owning her works. Now she does. And it also means ownership and control, that she'll have full, control over the licensing, what happens to them. Then ultimately, I think she'll make a lot more money being the owner, even though it cost her $360 million by reports. And she actually said the only reason she was able to afford it or do that was due to the fans supporting her by buying Taylor's version and also the extremely successful Eras tour. So it's been through that revenue generated from those means that she's been able to do this.
Yeah, and I think it says a lot about her artistry and her position, certainly, as well. Do you think that this sets a legal precedent for other possibly less popular artists or less, maybe not popular, less influential artists who either have found themselves in the same position that we haven't heard about or who may find themselves in the same position?
Well, look, I think, Ash, she's definitely sparked a huge amount of conversation around the world within the music industry and just general public, making them aware of the sort of exploitative practices that go on in the music industry. I think back to the example of the late Prince. He legally changed his name, and because he was in a dispute with Warner Brothers, I think it was, and he was trying to make the world aware. But she has done a great job in raising awareness of the sorts of issues that go on and the practices, and the fact that a lot of impressionable young artists sign that dotted line on the record label contract, thinking it's all good and not realizing truly what they're signing away. So, and she's also very much raised awareness for what she thinks the alternative should be, which was, the licensing of you own it, you license it back to the label, and it's all about the length of time. So I think that's wonderful because she's got such influence around the world, and she's always been an advocate for artists' rights. And she penned a letter, I think it was to the Wall Street Journal back in about 2014, and she talked about art being rare and how rare things are valuable and how they deserve to be paid for, properly. And so she's always been a great advocate for artists. I think in terms of anecdotal influence, from what I understand, Olivia Rodrigo renegotiated her label contracts, keeping in mind what happened to Taylor Swift and as a cautionary tale there. So I think that it's probably happening. I just read recently, I think Pete Murray here in Australia is branching out to be an independent artist and doing a similar thing, re-recording, or has plans to re-record. So it's definitely raising awareness around the world. In response, when I was doing this research, record labels are, of course, trying to do what they can to mitigate this, and some of them are putting in restraint of trade clauses, what we call restraint of trade clauses, which basically prohibit the songwriter or the artist, I should say, from re-recording for a certain number of years. So they're kind of trying to get around that. Obviously, Taylor Swift had restraint of trade clauses in her contracts with Big Machine, but they weren't for excessive periods of time. They might have been for like 5 or 7 years. So by the time she came around to recording Taylor's version, those durations had expired. But you can imagine now in newer record contracts, if they're putting in a restraint of trade clause that goes for like 25 or 30 years, that's not going to, that could potentially stop somebody from re-recording their music for that length of time. In America, I looked into it in New South Wales law, under New South Wales law, and it might be struck down in equity in New South Wales, but not in America. I think it would stand in America. So that's something to consider and think about in terms of just flow-on effect to the music industry. But I think overall, it's a good business move for her as well to acquire her music, and fans can look forward to certainly the release of previously unseen tracks, previously unseen things, and she'll have control over what's released and when for that. So I think all in all, it's a story a saga really it's dragged on for such a long time, but it has a very happy ending.
And I think it says a lot as well, that this is a young woman doing this, standing up for herself and for other people like her. And she's not, she's very much setting these expectations that are going to benefit a lot of other people other than just herself, because she's showing she's not going to stand for it, and someone, maybe they're just getting started, they read their contract fully and look into what it means and how it is benefiting them or perhaps exploiting them, and they'll go, well, if Taylor can do it, I can do it.
Yeah,
I think it says a lot about how much of the people who do things legally but do it exploitatively, do it because other people don't understand what they're doing and what it means. So I think it's really great that we have this happening, and it's very interesting as well to see what's going to happen for other record labels and things like that, and how that's going to change in the next 2 to 5 years. So I
Definitely.
think we'll see a big change.
Yeah, I think we will. I think I know certainly streaming shaking up everything, and I read an interesting statistic. They were talking about how, like 20 years ago, a lot of people made their money, a lot of artists and labels made their money by the touring, and it was less so for the sales and the licensing. But there's been a shift that it's now they're making more money from the sales and the licensing and the streaming, but it's very few number of artists who are making a huge amount of money, and a lot of other artists, a huge number of other artists are not making much money at all. So there's been this massive shift in terms of just revenue streams in the music industry, and I think that obviously different trends will keep emerging with that as technology changes and the nature of how people consume music changes as well. And there's also been a shift that a lot of new artists are not having to necessarily sign to a label. They're able to promote their music online through streaming themselves. So there's been a shift. It used to be that basically if you wanted to be famous and you wanted to have your music out there to the world, you had to do it through a label. But there are other options now emerging through the online world, and not everyone is as desperate to sign to a label. And there is certainly a growing awareness about the sorts of exploitative practices that go on. And of course, there's always going to be that power imbalance to some extent, an artist signing with a label, but there's much more awareness of the sorts of things that go on now.
Yeah, and I think that's what everything needs is a little bit more transparency. And if you are, this is going to sound really, really awful actually, if you don't know what something means, Google it. Google is free. Like, just go into Google. What does this clause mean? And, the first step to standing up for yourself is to understand what's happening.
That's
And I
right.
think that says a lot in terms of copyright, because for people who, unlike Taylor, don't have a lot of money, I can't spend $360 million to get ownership back of something that I've created. I'm sure there's probably not many people outside of the really famous artists who can. It's just, knowing what that is, what it means, and then making sure that there are steps in place to protect yourself against that happening. And hopefully we'll see less of it.
Yes, yes. And I've become a Swiftie in the process of all of this research. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it because it's relevant, it's interesting, it's real life. So to actually see how the law applies in this context has been very exciting to me.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's, the fact that there's now a whole symposium on the academic meaning, or I guess relevancy, of Taylor Swift to multiple different schools. It's
Yeah.
not just the arts, it's law, it's medicine. I'm sure there's marketing as well, and PR and business. All of that is opens up whole new avenues of study for just about everyone out there.
Yes, yeah, it makes it much more, in the case of law, much more relatable to people. But yeah, in every field, I mean, were people analysing the use of language in her works. There were people analysing symbols in her music videos. Like, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
She's produced such a diverse body of work that scholars can take that and use it in their own field as a contextual material for that.
Yeah. I don't know a lot about Taylor Swift. I listen to some of her songs. I quite like some of her songs. I wouldn't go far as to call myself a Swiftie, but being in the office in a radio station where we play Taylor Swift's music and where we have to know what's going on, and being surrounded by people who are Swifties, you learn a lot of things through osmosis. So it is very fascinating to be on the outside looking in and seeing how this impacts so many things, including my own job. All the songs that we have in our system, they are Taylor's version. We have Taylor's version. We're not playing the ones that until recently she didn't have ownership of. We are making, that it brings back that integrity into it of, how do we engage with this in a ethical way? And for us, that was, okay, we're going to air the versions that are Taylor's version, where we can. And I think that's what a lot of fans are doing. So, maybe we will see some of the other ones come back, like you said. What's going to happen financially as a business model. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting things happening.
Yeah. So, I think you will. I think we'll hear a lot more of the originals being used from now on, with people knowing that she will benefit financially from that and that she owns it. So, but fascinating. And what has happened at Tune FM has happened in lots of places, very much supporting her by only listening to and consuming Taylor's version and not the originals.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Wellet, for joining me on this, guiding me really on this deep dive. You are the expert, and I am simply following along on this journey. So I really appreciate your input and your expertise, your understanding of this, and your passion as well. I like hearing from people who are passionate about these subjects, and it teaches me a lot, and I hope our listeners that you all had a very enjoyable time as well. If you do have thoughts on this, please do, reach out, tell us what you think. Are you going to be streaming only Taylor's version still? Are you going to go back to listening to the originals? Let us know, and, engage. Tell us your thoughts. Love to hear them. Before we wrap up this afternoon, is there anything that you'd like to add that I haven't thought to ask, that I've skipped over, that I might have misunderstood?
No, I can't think of anything. I want to thank you for the opportunity for the deep dive into this and to discuss this research. It's taken a lot of my life and interest over the last, over a year and a half now. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, always glad to be of service. Now, putting you on the spot, is there a Taylor Swift song that we should play after this?
Oh, what will we play? Let's see. All right, well, let's go with You Belong With Me.
Awesome. I'll make sure that one's queued up. Thank you so much, Wellet.
Thank you very much, Ash.